All right, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Again, thank you for joining us for today's virtual entrepreneurship discussion. I'm Greg Berry, Assistant Director in the UAB Office of Alumni Affairs. Just a quick disclaimer, since this is a virtual discussion and many of us are coming from our homes, you may see kids or pets running around. Also, in order to be mindful of our guests, I would like to ask everyone to remain muted. We are in the midst of unprecedented times, and navigating a business can be a challenge. Today, we'll get examples and resources on how to prepare your business for all circumstances. Today, we are excited to explore this topic with Dr. Patrick Murphy. Dr. Murphy joined UAB in 2018 as the Goodrich Endowed Chair for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. He is also a full professor in the Collat School of Business. Throughout his career, Dr. Murphy has designed and led many successful entrepreneurship, social enterprise, and technology programs in university and ecosystem settings. His work and perspectives on entrepreneurial phenomena is regularly cited by national and international media outlets. Welcome, Dr. Murphy. Thank you so much for joining us today. And before I turn things over to Dr. Murphy, I'm going to launch a poll. And you should see it at this point. We just want to know a little bit about you, our audience. I'll keep the poll up for a few moments. You can submit your answer. Let us know if you're a serial entrepreneur, if you've already started your own venture, if you're thinking about it, or if you're just curious of what Dr. Murphy will say. We'll have time for Q&A towards the end of today's presentation. Be sure to submit your questions through the chat box. That will be available to everybody. At this time, I'm going to go ahead and end the polling and invite Dr. Murphy to share his thoughts with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Greg Berry, and thank you to the National Alumni Society at UAB for putting this together. I love doing these sorts of things. I love talking about this topic, and it's inspiring to me that so many alumni and other people would come together from across the country to talk about entrepreneurship. And in particular, we'll try to talk a little bit about the entrepreneurship program at UAB that we're building. I'll try to add in a little comment here and there about it, but really this is going to be a topical lecture. I'm going to talk about a couple of concepts that are what we teach when we teach the entrepreneurial mindset and when we work with entrepreneurs at all stages of entrepreneurship. And I think in particular right now, given the prevailing circumstances that Greg alluded to, the entrepreneurial mindset is more important than ever because it is something that helps business people think about uncertainty. When you have to work with people who are coming at a very uncertain environment, differently from you, how to collaborate and coordinate with them, especially when we're using distance technology, how to turn problems into opportunities, and all the different things that aspiring entrepreneurs or current entrepreneurs have to work with. That's what we teach. But I have taught this stuff for 2 decades around the world. A lot of different cultures, a lot of different regions. And I have never seen the magnification around entrepreneurship. I'll just give you a short example right now before I get into the content. We have a local entrepreneurial venture here in our Birmingham region. They're one of our premier ventures right now. They're called Mixtros. It's a mother and daughter team. I'm a big fan of them. I think they may do for Birmingham eventually what Groupon did for Chicago. I know we have Shipt and everything, but I'm talking about the ecosystem right now. When this pandemic came up, they do networking events at physical meetings. That's what they do. That's what they focus on. So you can imagine what the pandemic did to their business model, their core operation. And so they immediately pivoted and they turned all of their entrepreneurial energies to the online realm. And they're partnering with webinars and they're bringing people together virtually, and they've built a web app. And it's this radical pivot. And it had a way of magnifying what the core is of what they're doing already. And as I talk with entrepreneurs, I'm finding that a lot of these circumstances with the pandemic are causing them to dial back a little bit and look deeply into the very personal reasons that are driving what they're doing. And that has caused us to really focus on some of the things that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. So I just mentioned Mixtros, and I don't like to drop a lot of venture names when I do these type of things, but that is one local entrepreneurial venture that we're really excited about, and we're very proud of them here in Birmingham. They just did a great session with some of my MBA students a couple of weeks ago, so I would urge you to check them out and look at what they're doing. Let me go ahead and bring up some of the content that I want to share with you. I hope you can all see that. If you can't see that, somebody jump in and let me know. These are a couple of models that I'm going to use to talk through the content today. And we have about 26 minutes to go, so I'm going to try to stay on task. I think this will be useful to you. Again, I've been developing these concepts for many years. If any of my former students from UAB are in the audience, some of this is going to be familiar to you. We usually take a whole semester to go through some of these topics, so we're going to have to be necessarily a little bit superficial and a little bit brief, but maybe in the Q&A I can drill down a little bit if anybody has any questions about anything in particular. Before I get into the model here at the bottom, I'll kind of point at it right there. I want to share with you two things that make entrepreneurship a really unique area. One of them is growth. One of the first things I do when I work with entrepreneurs, or I develop a class or a curriculum, or I teach a group of entrepreneurial students, is to spend a lot of time talking about what growth really is. And that's important because it's not something that we as human beings are hardwired to think about very intelligently. We're actually very bad at thinking about growth. We're taught, instead of growth, to think about reliability and stability and routine activities. And you can think about like the normal distribution of events, or this bell-shaped curve where we function. We use this functional form to assemble cases around a meaningful central tendency or an average or something like that. We use it in statistics. We use it in a lot of business and economics and operations management and so forth. You can take that paradigm and just throw it right out the window in the entrepreneurial realm. It's not what we teach. In fact, if we use that as the paradigm, we're really setting learners and entrepreneurs up to fail. Because in the entrepreneurial realm, if you are average, you will fail. You can't be just like everybody else. You need to be, in the beginning, something quite different, way out on the tail ends of the distribution. Ideally, you identify a problem that everybody knows about, but you come up with a solution that only you know about, and therefore you do something that's unlike what everybody else is doing about that particular problem. And then that curve, that bell-shaped curve, moves toward you. And as it does, that is how you profit, and that is how you generate value, and that is how you do entrepreneurial things. But to do that, you need to have an understanding of how growth works. And as I mentioned, it's just not something that we're hardwired to understand very intelligently. I'll use an example to demonstrate just how poor we are at thinking about growth. If there's any of my students out there, you will have heard this before, but if you know the answer, don't respond right away. Maybe you can put it in the chat. So if I have say a piece of paper like this one, this is about 0.5 millimeter thick, okay? And if I turn it this way and double it, it's twice as thick, makes it 1 millimeter thick. And then if I do it again, it's 2 millimeters thick, 4 millimeters thick, so on and so forth. So the question is, how many times would we need to double that piece of paper before it would be thick enough to reach from here all the way to the moon? And so there's a number out there. It's an empirical question. Does anybody want to guess or post in the chat? Usually when I ask that question, people say things like, okay, I can't see if anybody's posting anything. 300 times. Okay, thank you, Eileen. Good guess, 300. Anybody else want to guess? People put like 100,000, 500,000, 1 million, 300. The answer is about 44. You can Google it and look it up. It's about 44 times. And so if that's surprising to you, that's kind of my point. We're just bad at conceptualizing how growth can occur and how quickly it can unfold and evolve and change your entire situation. And if you think that things, empirical elements around your entrepreneurial venture, if it takes off, won't grow on that same order of magnitude if your venture gets traction and really starts to take off, you're wrong. They will, in terms of the attention that your venture gets, or even the money that it makes, or the person hours spent on the work in your operations and all of that. And so we need to wrap our head around what that growth can lead to, how it can unfold, what it means for your leadership, what it means for your team, and what it means for I'm going to bring this image up for you right now. One of the byproducts of growth is waste. And in the biological world, we know that anything that grows generates waste. That same logic applies to the entrepreneurial realm, where anything that grows, and it is a definitional component of how we view entrepreneurship. If you're not trying to grow your project, you're not undertaking entrepreneurship. You may own a business, but if you're not trying to grow it, you're undertaking what we call management, which involves making decisions about the resources that you have, planning, organizing, leading, and controlling. It's not until you really start to try to penetrate deeper into a market or open up a second location or grow your customer base or hire more employees and make those growth-laden decisions that you run into the problems associated with growth. But every time you do that, you run the risk of generating error. And we spend a lot of time when we teach in our program cultivating a mindset that is comfortable with error and mistakes. Some of our greatest entrepreneurial ventures throughout history have been the product of mistakes. In fact, I just held one of them up a little bit earlier when I held up the paper. This has adhesive on the back of it, like a Post-it note, right? When the innovators at 3M came up with that, they were trying to make a reusable glue. They were not trying to create what it eventually became. And so when you try to make decisions about the future in these conditions of uncertainty about how to grow your business, there is going to be error. But the trick from an entrepreneurial standpoint, what we're teaching students and learners and what we're training entrepreneurs to do is not to throw those errors away, but rather to put boundaries around them, kind of like we have at the bottom of the model here, especially put boundaries around the costs associated with that error and use it as a discovery engine, because it can lead to unintentional breakthroughs that you are not aware of. So growth and error are key to what we're going to talk about today. And the only other thing I would mention before we get into the model, right down here at the bottom, is uncertainty. Uncertainty is different from risk. With risk, you know the range of outcomes and you understand it's kind of like betting on a horse race or playing blackjack. You know the probability distribution of the outcomes, so you kind of know how much you stand to lose and you know what might happen and what probably won't happen. But with uncertainty, that distribution doesn't even exist. It's like going to a horse race, but you can't find the horse. It's just an outcome that you did not plan on happening at all. And so making decisions in the face of uncertainty is part of the entrepreneurial mindset that we spend a lot of time teaching our students here at UAB, in addition to the growth and the error that I just touched on. I could talk about that for a long time, but in the interest of time, we're going to have to move into the model now. But I just wanted to start with those baseline concepts before we get into this. So this is a model I want to share with everybody. I call it the entrepreneurial journey. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been teaching entrepreneurs for 19, almost 20 years now. And this is something that has grown out of experiences with entrepreneurs and my own research, my own work. I am an entrepreneur, by the way. I have a side business that a lot of people don't know about. Some people do, but I have racehorses in upstate New York, and I have a small training and breeding operation. So I've dabbled a little bit in that particular industry, hence the horse racing example that I used earlier. But I am a scholar at heart, and I am very passionate about training entrepreneurs, especially startup entrepreneurs, to move into this realm, because I think it's good for our country, it's good for our economy, it's good for our society, and it's a great way to help a person make their own future. And this is a framework that has emerged out of those engagements over the years. I call it the entrepreneurial journey. I'm going to talk through it for you here today. And I hope there's a few people listening that are thinking about where we are right now in society and what we're dealing with, and maybe what challenges are sitting in front of you with regard to your business or someone's business whom you know, or your own career. And I hope you get a little bit of insight out of this that may be helpful to you. And we'll try to leave time at the end for Q&A. We have about 17 minutes left, and I'm going to try to get through this really quickly. So the first thing you should notice is that the model has two dimensions, a vertical and a horizontal one. The horizontal one goes from personal over here on the right to public, which is over here on the left. These are polar opposites. And the reason we have them set up on this dimension like that is because the entrepreneurial journey that an entrepreneurial individual undertakes will compel them to do things that are personal, but you also have to do things that are public. In other words, people can see you do them, and you have to communicate in a public forum. And we're going to talk about how both of those figure into this model. And then the vertical dimension ranges from passionate at the top down to pragmatic on the bottom. Here too, you also have to undertake actions in your entrepreneurial journey that are driven by your passion. And we'll talk about that in more specific detail in just a minute. But passion is not enough. You also have to do things that are practical, that work, things that are, and that's what pragmatic means. You have to do things that are feasible and that work. Either one of them by themselves are not enough. And so one of the things that make an entrepreneurial career so challenging is that you have to do all of these things, even though they are diametrically opposed to one another over the course of your entrepreneurial journey. So let's start up in the top quadrant. I'll try to zoom in a little bit so we can look at this, which is defined by the personal end of the horizontal dimension and the passionate end of the vertical dimension. Whenever you have two dimensions that have two levels, you can make like 2 times 2 equals 4. So we have 4 quadrants that we're going to work through here. This is usually where entrepreneurship starts. I've trained so many entrepreneurs over the years that have gone on to do really cool things. They've been on Shark Tank, the national TV show. A lot of them are in other states or other countries, and they've raised a lot of money. But no matter what they're doing now, they start out in a place that can be defined by personalism or a personal enterprise, an idea that only they are thinking of or only they are aware of, a solution that they've come up with to a problem that everybody knows about. And it's also defined by passion. It's very important in the early stages to be passionate about what you're doing, because otherwise you're not going to want to do it. You have to be motivated in that intrinsic way, or else you're just not going to go through the trials and tribulations of the early stages. And so a couple of activities tend to fit into this quadrant regarding the activities that entrepreneurs do. And they are studying concepts, building skills, and cultivating a personal style. So studying the concepts is what we do in our entrepreneurship program at UAB. This framework here, which I'm just giving you a taste of today, and a couple of the other frameworks that were on the screen earlier, we can spend weeks diving into those frameworks and talking about them, and we can work with local entrepreneurs to get these conceptual frameworks into the minds of the learners so that they literally change the way you view the world. That's what a good theory does. That's what a good conceptual framework does for an individual. And so in the early stages, it's important to do that. Whether you learn an economic framework or whether you learn a different language that can serve to change the way you view the world. And by different language, I don't just mean like culturally laden languages in other countries. I also mean like programming or music, like the deep dives into these different ways to encode meaning and thereby find a different way to look at the world. These are conceptual journeys, and they're important in the beginning to wrap your head around. If you're going to launch a business in another culture, for example, it's important to get a sense of what conceptual paradigms and frameworks are akin to that culture, and what languages are used, and what systems of meanings are important to making sense out of the way things work there. It's important because if you don't do that, a lot of things are invisible to you. You're going to miss a lot of things, and you're going to make a lot of you're going to generate a lot of error that's not necessarily helpful to your business. And so studying the concepts is important. I hope that's something of what brought all of you to this webinar today, to just get exposed to the concepts maybe and think about entrepreneurship from that point of view. Building skills is a little bit different. This is when you kind of brush up on things to keep yourself sharp, whether it is learning how to use a software program or learning how to use a particular tool. these kinds of things that need to be updated every once in a while are important in these early stages of the entrepreneurial journey. So if I'm going to start a technology venture, for example, like Mixtros did. Mixtros, the venture I mentioned earlier, these are not technology founders. They're not traditional technology founders. So they had to learn a lot about wireframing and how different web apps work and what the different programming languages can do. They're not coders. They didn't learn programming, but they just learned enough about the limits around how to have a conversation about those things. And it's important to do that in the early stages. The last thing I'll mention here before I move on is cultivating a personal style. Entrepreneurship is inherently personal. It is, if you start a venture and it starts to gain traction and take off and you hire other people, then your own personal style for making decisions and the values that define who you are become the embedding mechanisms and the seeds of the culture that eventually defines that business. Even if the business becomes huge. And there are many examples, like, I don't know, KFC comes to mind with Colonel Sanders and the whole story and the anthropology around who he was and what he did in the early days. Your personal style, which is going to be different from everybody else's in the world, is important. And when you act in relation to your own personal style, it is motivated behavior. It doesn't even drain you of energy if you're able to do what you love to do naturally. In the early stages, it's very important for an entrepreneur to do that. Eventually, however, we move away from the personal, and as a business takes off and grows and starts to become a little bit more real, our behavior becomes a little bit more public. You have to start telling other people about what you're doing. And there's a couple of things that tend to happen in my experience at this stage, and they are exploring the environment, engaging mentors, and discovering an opportunity. Exploring the environment it really looks like research. So I've had a lot of students graduate from my program here at UAB. I've already had people graduating and come back wanting advice or mentoring. I had a ton of them in the city of Chicago do that. And one of the things that they often ask me about is, can you help me get access to this database in the library or some other sort of resource that the university has that helps them do research? Because they may want to know, for example, how many businesses of a particular type have launched in 3 different zip codes over the last couple of years, or different things like that help them explore the environment. That kind of activity becomes really important after you've done some of the other things that we've already talked about. You're exploring the world, learning what the affordances are in the environment and what the limitations are. And it's something that, again, just looks like research. It's driven activity. It's passionate activity. Hence, it's defined by the top level of the vertical dimension. But it takes you out of your shell and it gets you out into the world where you're engaging the world and learning about the world and pulling data together. Another thing that I think it's really important to do at this early stage, a lot of people don't do it early enough, is engage mentors. A mentor should be somebody who will not be a competitor. They're not going to hate on you if you do really well. They shouldn't be somebody who has a vested interest in your success. They should be sufficiently disinterested that they can be objective and give you the kind of feedback that you can really use, and they're selflessly helping you. Professors make very good mentors. Older relatives make very good mentors, but it's something that's important to find. And again, it's the kind of thing that takes you out of your shell, where you have to start telling other people in the world about what you're doing. The third item right here, I don't have nearly enough time to get into this one, but this one is very important. You can see that it says, discover opportunity and formulate idea. I'm going to zoom out really quickly and go into this model right here. This is another framework that I've developed over the years. It's called the heptological model. Hepta means 7 in Greek, and this has 7 stages. But you'll see that the second sort of element in this model has a rectangle around it, and there are 2 items in there, idea and opportunity. Failing to delineate between those 2 things is the #1 reason entrepreneurial ventures fail, because it leads to so many different things. That's what I'm referring to right here. Again, we don't have time to get into it very deeply, but an opportunity is something that's external to you. It's out there in the world. You come upon it as you explore the environment outside of yourself. An idea is completely opposite. It comes from in your mind, or maybe even from your heart. It is highly personal. It is very subjective. By subjective, I mean other people aren't going to know about it if you don't tell them. And that's quite different from an opportunity. An opportunity is objective and external. An idea is subjective and internal. And it is the match between those two things that really makes entrepreneurial phenomena happen. And it leads to so many other things over the life cycle of a venture. And those things tend to reflect the aspects of an opportunity and an idea. For example, revenues tend to be more associated with an opportunity. They are external and so forth, versus, and the opposite of revenues would be costs, right? They're not externally stimulated, those are internally stimulated. And so revenues and costs, product market fit, you name it, they all stem from this early stage conceptual matching between the opportunity and the idea. And it's something that an entrepreneur needs to figure out early on. A good mentor can be helpful with that, and so can your mentors. Okay, we're gonna move around. I only have about 6 minutes left. I'm gonna try to stay on time here. The third quadrant, here we're moving away, you may have noticed, we're moving away from the passionate public quadrant and into this public and pragmatic quadrant. This is, say you've launched your business and it's a little more than a project and you're starting to think about, your prototyping. Maybe you have a product or service that you're doing some testing in the market. You're getting data back from those tests and you want to think about forming a team around your venture and you want to do some serious networking. Networking and team building are very pragmatic activities. I think this common wisdom or common knowledge that you just kind of know it in your heart or you know it in your gut when you can work with somebody and that kind of thing, that's important. But when you're building a team, you should be very pragmatic about the people you bring on to join your team. Research their background, check their credentials, contract it out, be very pragmatic about bringing them on board. Ideally, what an entrepreneur is looking for at this stage is somebody whose skill set and competencies complement theirs in terms of a very fundamental dimension. You can break it down in terms of the artist and the business person, or the creative type and the non-creative type, but you see this in a lot of entrepreneurial ventures. Usually, as a venture starts to take off and really succeed, there's usually somebody on the top management team who's more of the creative, idea person, and then there's another person who's a little bit more like the business type. I mean, this is why musicians and artists have managers. You can't do it. Just being creative is not enough. You need to bring in that other element, and that is an important part of forming your team in the early stages. It also relates to the idea and opportunity dichotomy that I talked about a little bit earlier, by the way. The artist, for example, tends to be a little bit more associated with the ideas. The business person tends to be a little bit more externally focused on the opportunities that are out there in the community or in the market. I'm going to leave it at that in the interest of time. Networking is another piece here that becomes very important. In my experience, nobody networks like entrepreneurs. They are extremely strategic about it. I know entrepreneurs that just make lists of all the different events and activities, and they just go there to check them out, see who's in the room, see who they can meet. They're not doing that just to meet people. When you're getting serious about your business, you're doing that kind of activity to find out what kind of resources you can tap into. As you start to need to bootstrap and take advantage of different resources in the environment, you start looking for people who have those resources to share with you. And by resources, I mean their talent, physical space, technology. You can do really creative deals, right? I mean, say you're starting a restaurant and you need your air conditioner fixed. Maybe another entrepreneur who can fix your AC will do it if you let them eat in your restaurant for a month or something like that. There's all these sorts of bootstrapping solutions that you can get as you navigate a network. But you need to understand there's a couple of rules of networking that define how a network actually behaves. One of them is you need to take that adage of it's who you know and throw it out the window, because it's not really who you know. It's smarter to say it's who you know knows. It's who you know knows. That's really where you get the value out of your network. So if you go to a networking event, for example, and there's 200 people there, it's actually quite unlikely that you're going to meet the one individual in that room who can really help you out, given what you're looking for. However, it's pretty likely that one person in that room knows another person who's not there right now, who is the one you're actually looking for. It's that second order network where the value really lies. And so if the person you're looking for isn't there right at that moment, if that's the rule of the game, then how do you need to navigate that network? And what we teach our students in our program is make yourself memorable. Have a contact or have a meaningful engagement with as many people in the room as possible, but make them understand and make them feel what you're doing as an entrepreneur. And then when that networking engagement ends, and then 2 weeks later, when one of the people you met is at another event where you're not present, and they meet a person who wasn't present at the first event, that person says to them something that triggers a memory of you in their mind. And then they say, you know what, there's somebody I need to introduce you to. And then you get a random introduction to somebody who can really help you out. That in entrepreneurial networks, that tends to be how it works. And there's other things I can share with you, but we don't have much time left. So I'm going to move on to the last quadrant of the entrepreneurial journey. This is when an entrepreneur starts thinking about the exit from their entrepreneurial journey, or maybe they're going to retire, or maybe a radical pivot is necessary. And these kind of decisions, they always come because at the beginning I told you that growth is definitive to entrepreneurship. It's a very important element of the entrepreneurial journey, and it's part of all entrepreneurial phenomena. But anything that grows eventually dies. Anything. It either dies, or it's reincarnated, or it needs to radically evolve and change. And so this logic applies to entrepreneurial projects. And so eventually, one will need to pivot the business because the environment changed or a new technology emerged, or for whatever reason they might need to exit. That's usually a personal decision. It's a highly personal decision, but at the same time, it's a practical decision, which is why it's in this fourth quadrant, which is defined by the personal end of the horizontal dimension and the pragmatic end of the vertical dimension. So knowing when you need to evolve or exit is important, and confronting change in the world around you is a big part of this. I told you in the beginning, and I'll just kind of wrap up with this, about how Mixtros, one of our local Birmingham ventures, is radically pivoting in response to the change that's happening in the world. And I'm just thinking back right now about all the entrepreneurs that I know who have exited. For example, the guy, I'll just tell you a story about a guy. He's quite a character. The guy who founded Kinko's, I met him in Chicago. His nickname was Kinko in college. That's where the name comes from. And you know it's FedEx Kinko's now, right? So he had a big payday and a big exit, and FedEx was running the business. And he was at this gathering in my entrepreneurship program when we were talking about the business, and he was literally like livid, just angry with what FedEx was doing and the decisions they were making. He wasn't unhappy because of, failure or lack of success. The business has done well. That wasn't it. It was more about his baby that he created. He was watching it grow and evolve in different ways that he wasn't controlling and wasn't part of. So it was very personal to him. And I think that's what happens at this stage of the entrepreneurial journey. So I'm going to stop there. We're right at about 30 minutes. There's a lot more depth I can go into in any of this stuff, but I would welcome any questions. And I want to thank all of you for showing up. Events like these are very important to the health of our community and our ecosystem. And we're taking the development of our entrepreneurship program very seriously here at UAB. And we're building a strong entrepreneurial community, and we're building a strong entrepreneurial program. And we want all of you to be part of it. So thanks for tuning in. I'll stop there. And if anybody wants to ask any questions, I would welcome that.
Dr. Murphy, when it comes to the current situation that we're in, what effects do you foresee the crisis having on long-term business environment?
Long-term, I think we're all learning a lot. I mean, we're learning how to be resilient. Resiliency is an important part of the entrepreneurial mindset, and that's what we're learning right now. Long-term, that's a benefit. Short-term, I mean, it's shifted our focus. And so we need to think about, well, think about your costs, for example. What are those fixed costs that you absolutely have to pay every month that you can't get around no matter what? Just making sure that you can deal with those. And then anything else that is a little bit less central, maybe foregoing that for a while. It's shifting everybody's mindset toward their business and forcing them to tighten their belts. And that's driving a kind of resiliency that long-term, I'm very optimistic about what this is doing. Short-term, it's not pleasant. It's stressful. It's heightened the uncertainty. There's a lot of bad outcomes that have happened. I mean, I had a relative in my wife's family who got really, really sick because of what's going on. So there's short-term effects and there's long-term effects. But long-term, I'm optimistic about what's happening. This just came to mind. I'll just add this before I stop. You know, tragic events drive entrepreneurial phenomena. In the city of Chicago, for example, our flagship co-working space, 1871, that's named after the Great Chicago Fire, which destroyed the city. 1871, by the way, is the same year city of Birmingham was founded. And the Great Depression, in terms of venture formation per capita, more ventures were founded during that tragic time and right after the Chicago Fire than almost any other time in those respective histories. And so I'm optimistic about the long-term effects of what's happening right now.
I'm going to share the poll right here, and then there's a couple questions in the chat box that I do want to get to as well. This kind of shows the scope of the background of the individuals we have. Since some people are curious, some people want to become their own boss, is now a good time to potentially start their own entrepreneurial venture?
It's a great time to start thinking about it. By venture formation, I mean, think about the earlier stages of the model that we just went through. Studying the concepts, building the skills, cultivating your personal style. All of these are things that, in my experience, need to happen before you venture out into actually taking action. So I think right now is a fantastic time to do those things. When it comes time to setting up your business, I mean, there's a lot of there's different government support programs and state support programs and all that, and it may be more difficult or less difficult to actually take action. But setting up the business, I would be very cautious and judicious and wait until it looks like we're turning the corner. But in terms of getting ready to do that, I think right now is a great time to prepare for that.
Going off that a little bit, what is the method of getting a business license, and when do you have to get that business license?
Varies state by state. If we're talking about the state of Alabama, then when you start earning significant income from business operations, then that the government might want to tax, then you need to get a business license. There's no like hard and fast rule about that, but if you're making money serving a market, an identifiable market with a product or a service or an activity, then you need to look into getting your business license.
What are some of the major challenges entrepreneurs are facing right now as we are navigating these uncertain times?
There's like psychological challenges that people are dealing with, and that involves uncertainty. You know, when I almost stopped consuming mainstream media, to be honest with you, because their business model compels them to write things that drive attention. I'm looking to other sources to get my information about what's actually going on. So I think the fear, only thing to fear is fear itself. That's a big challenge right now to everybody. And I would, that's probably the biggest one of all. In terms of other types of challenges, well, I mean, it depends on your business model. There are some businesses, online businesses and delivery businesses and so forth, that have done very well given what's happening. But to the restaurants, I have a number of friends that own restaurants here in Birmingham. They have taken a big hit. I know a cafe owner not far from where I live. Their business is down 80%. Any business that brings people together where they're around one another, there are obvious challenges associated with, there are threats to the business model that are associated with the pandemic. But I think by far the largest threat of all to entrepreneurial action is the fear or the uncertainty that's being driven by what's going on.
Talk a little bit about the entrepreneurship program here at UAB. It's a newer program, something that you are heavily invested in. So just tell the audience a little bit about what you're doing and what the program is all about.
So we are the fourth university or college in the state of Alabama to have an entrepreneurship undergrad major. It's going to launch in the fall with the fall semester. It was approved last spring by the Alabama System Board of Trustees. It's a big deal, and I mean, even nationally speaking, I mean, not just in Alabama, but nationally, it's a big deal. And I think we should all be really excited and proud of it because it's just really rare. I mean, I said that we're the fourth in the state of Alabama. I don't know if you guys all know how many colleges or universities are in the state of Alabama, but there's about 60, maybe 61, and only 4 have a proper undergrad entrepreneurship major. On the national level, there's around 5,300 colleges or universities in the country. Probably 300, less than 300, have a proper undergraduate entrepreneurship major. And by major, I mean it's right on par with finance, accounting, economics, management, marketing, all these other traditional business majors that we think of. And so the concepts that we talked about in this brief meeting today, we are making them a core part of the curriculum in terms of what students are taught. And when you have a degree program like that, it embeds whatever the degree program focuses on right into the core operations of the institution. And so we've been able to do that at UAB. And President Watts and the dean of our business school and all of my colleagues have made a very welcoming and supportive community when we've been able to get this done, because a lot of universities just can't get it done, but we've been able to. I'll just rifle very quickly through the courses that make up the major, because I think some people listening may be interested in hearing about those. There are 6 required courses. The first one is called the Entrepreneurial Mindset, and it's a sophomore level course. So it's a lot of really frame-breaking ways of thinking about the world, about markets, and about communities, where we touch on a lot of the things that we talked about in this presentation, but we really give students activities and projects to make them just start thinking about themselves as one who can change the world. And if I don't like what's going on in the world, or if I see a problem in the community or in the market, I'm not going to sit home and just be angry about it or get upset. I'm actually going to take constructive action, and here's how I can take steps to do that. And that's what we teach in the first class. The next 4 classes, which make up the middle of the major, are entrepreneurial marketing and sales, entrepreneurial finance and accounting, social and community enterprise, and entrepreneurial strategy and operations. In each one of those 4, you'll see that we have put functions together that aren't business functions together that aren't typically put together in classes. So like strategy and operations, for example. Strategy is usually an externally facing content area. Operations is a little bit more internally. But in entrepreneurial ventures, those functions are, the silos that divide them aren't really there. It's much more organic because it's growth oriented, like we were talking about earlier. So we built the program around that reality. And then the last required course, it's called the Entrepreneurial Engagement Seminar. I built my career working with entrepreneurs and students in teams in these consulting engagements. And I had a team of adjuncts and other people in my program in Chicago where we did this. It makes huge impact on the ecosystem. And we're going to do that at UAB. We're going to put we've already done it. I've taught it a couple of times already, but we put students into teams and they do pro bono outreach consulting projects with entrepreneurs from our ecosystem. And they're essentially applying what they've already learned in the program to help local entrepreneurs with whatever hurdles they may be facing. So great for the students because they can see what the concepts look like in the real world, but it's also good for our community and our ecosystem because we're working directly with the entrepreneurs.
There's somebody in the chat who owns a couple of coffee houses here in Birmingham. You mentioned building a big team or a good team is key. what are your basic tips on how to find a good staff, especially for cafes, but relating to pretty much any business? And how do you interview in a way that you truly know that they're a good fit for your organization?
I like to ask people what problems keep them up at night, and what problems they think are important with regard to their career, or with regard to your particular business and what you want to do. One of the things I didn't mention earlier was that all entrepreneurship starts with problems. You don't go to where everything's working great to be an entrepreneur. You go to where things stand to be improved. And that means there are typically identifiable problems there. One of the items we teach in our program is we rather than thinking about these things as problems, we try to get students to think about them as questions. In fact, in some languages, the word for problem and question is literally the same word. So problems call for solutions, questions call for answers. So asking these individuals, what problems are you really interested in as you build your career? What questions do you have? What kind of impact do you want to have on our community or our society? And then relate that to your business. I mean, I know it's a cafe, but you certainly must have ties to your local community, having a particular impact on the local community, doing things for people who live in that community, and then making the conversation all about that. And if you're able to find people that gel with that jibe with that, these are the individuals who are going to be intrinsically motivated to join and be part of a team. And so looking around the community and looking to the community to find those individuals is important. And by the way, I'll just end with this. By community, you have to think about what that word really means. It's not just geographic. It can be demographic. So an identifiable class of individuals based on gender, any diversity variable that you can think of, any demographic variable that you might come up with. You can serve communities in that way, and it can be a driving force in your business. So I think making the conversation about those types of things will attract people, and you'll be able to select from amongst people who will be motivated to really work for the vision that you have.
Advice for starting a multiple level marketing company?
Multi-level marketing? Oh man, okay. So not like the pyramid schemes or anything like that. Technology. I mean, there's, these are very technology enabled sorts of businesses now. And multi-level marketing involves scaling, and the more people you have at the base of that pyramid, the taller you're able to build. And so I would try to use technology and look to the cutting edge movements in the technological realm, whatever's bringing people together and how people are sharing information through virtual means right now. And I don't mean like the stuff everybody knows about. I mean like the bleeding edge tools. I don't know, TikTok or something like that, but TikTok's been in the news. I don't know if you guys have been following it, but whatever's bringing folks together to share information, build your business in relation to that, or build your business in a way that reflects the logic of those kind of tools. But do it with technology as much as possible, because technology is becoming more and more social, and there's not much more social than a multi-level marketing business, because you're integrating across people horizontally, but also vertically.
Are there industries that are easier to break into as an entrepreneur?
It depends on, I think, where you are. I think there are industries that are harder to break into as an entrepreneur. I mean, I guess I can take a question like that and think about it locally, like easier. No, I can't say that any one industry is easier. I can say that some industries are harder. I mean, the restaurant business is famously hard, right? I mean, I mentioned I know a lot of restaurateurs here in town. I mean, you can have a reliable customer who'll come to your business, your restaurant for 5 years, and they just have one bad meal, one bad experience, and then they're gone. They won't come back. And there's all these like barriers to entry, and the competition is really tough. So there are some that are harder, but right now I'm finding a lot of I don't know, like maybe I've seen a lot of businesses that do digital marketing oriented things. So if you can make a logo for people like digitally, and if you can get it out there for them, I know people that do that and make a lot of money and they don't have any employees. And I know a number of them who have done that rather quickly. So I love questions like that because they force me to think. But that is a business that I've seen a lot of people launch, and they've been able to do it relatively easily and make money fast.
I've got a comment that somebody's hesitant to develop a full online model of business because they're worried about the strategy will just leave their business exposed once the pandemic shifts. Touched on it a little bit earlier, but do you wait to launch or do you push forward and correct course later?
We talk a lot about the logic of ready, fire, aim in our entrepreneurship program. So I think, yes, pushing forward is good, but knowing that you're going to run into things that look like mistakes and they look like errors and it's not going to work out the way that you expected, but don't take those mistakes and throw them away. We talked about growth in the biological world generating waste. The waste is fertilizer, like the leaves on the ground fertilize the forest. Generate mistakes with your actions and then learn from them. But this could be helpful to you, whoever asks that question. Don't bet the farm in one bold sweep. Boil down the vision that you have into baby steps, or as small of the steps as possible, and take step by step building toward your vision. And then each one of those steps may be a mistake or may generate error. But if you generate error on a smaller scale, it won't kill you. It won't be a crippling error. It won't be a mortal error that sinks your entire business. But move toward your vision, but boil it down to what we call organic growth. Or some of you may have heard of the lean startup. This is like lean startup logic that I'm talking about right now. But if you're worried about sharing your business publicly, I think that was also part of the question. I find in general that entrepreneurs tend to be a little bit more afraid of that than they need to be, because the odds that somebody's going to see what you're doing and be motivated enough to actually do it themselves, they're lower than you think they are. Because remember, this all starts out for very personal reasons, and the individual may be different from you in any of a number of different ways, and therefore they're just not going to be energized by the idea of doing that as much as you are. And to the degree that they're not, then they're less of a threat to you. So I hope that helps.
In an age of technology that we're in, obviously having an online component is key. I mean, it's huge. How robust of a website is needed initially?
Depends on the industry. If you're going to start a multi-level marketing firm where you need to connect with a lot of people and take action, and they need to take action in relation to you, then you need a robust web app, if not, just a simple web presence. I think you have to view technology, like I said earlier, it is really, truly, the technological and the social realms are coming together. They're merging, they overlap significantly. And I do a lot of work with social enterprises, and in that realm, you can really see it. A lot of the most socially purposeful ventures out there are highly technological because they need to find ways to spread awareness and educate people on what they're doing. And they just have very technological, algorithm-based ways of doing that. Really, really interesting business models. But I think in general, if you view the importance of your web presence as, if nothing else, just letting people know that you're there and making people aware of your business or aware of you, that's important. Now, if you actually need to serve a market or serve a community through virtual channels, then that's another sort of question. But even for the traditional businesses, restaurants or dry cleaners or whatnot, I think it's vital that you have some kind of presence out there so people can find you, because when they need whatever you're providing, that's the first place they're going to go. They're going to go online and try to find you, and you need to be present there so they can find you. So I think it's important.
Murphy, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to put this presentation together for our audience. And thank you so much for being a part of our webinar series.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me, and best of luck to everybody out there. If I can be of service to any of you, you're welcome to contact me.
Thank you very much. A recording of today's webinar will be available online tomorrow. And be sure to watch for upcoming virtual offerings through the Office of Alumni Affairs. On Tuesday, July 14th, we will welcome alumnus Sam Miller, Vice President at Burton Advertising, to talk about building your own brand. Then on Thursday, July 23rd, Dr. Stephanie Yates, Director of the Regents Institute for Financial Education at UAB, will discuss financial security, how to survive uncertain times. And then on Tuesday, August 4th, we will welcome Brandon Wright, Director of the UAB Career Center, to present the do's and don'ts of interviewing and networking electronically. All of them can be found at alumni.uab.edu. And don't forget to check out our conversations with alumni as a part of UAB Green and Told. The podcast is dedicated to sharing the stories of the UAB community. New episodes of Green and Told are released every other week. The latest one was released yesterday with Spirit Coordinator Cody Sellers here at UAB. You can find us on Spotify and iTunes, as well as alumni.uab.edu/greenandtold. Also, interact with UAB National Alumni Society on social media. We can be found at UAB Alumni on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can look us up on LinkedIn by searching UAB Alumni Career Community. Finally, if you want more information about the National Alumni Society, visit us online at alumni.uab.edu or email alumni@uab.edu. Once again, thank you for joining us for today's discussion with Dr. Murphy. Good afternoon. We hope you have a good rest of the day. And as always, go Blazers.